Well, you've been wondering how long it would take OJ to find the real killer. Now we have to ask, how long is it going to take Jussie Smollett to find the guys who beat him up? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, breaking news as we record this today, Tuesday, the charges against Jussie Smollett, some 16 charges, I believe, were all dropped. As a result, not of a deal, say his attorneys, but at the instigation of the prosecution, who basically said, we thank Mr. Smollett for his cooperation, for his community service, and we'll thank you very much. We'll keep the $10,000 bond money, and we will expunge his record as if it had never happened. You may remember that the Empire TV show star said that he was accosted and assaulted by two Make America Great Again hat-wearing assailants who threw slurs at him that were both homophobic and racist. And then later, those two alleged guys said that he had hired them to do that very thing, to generate publicity for his show. It's part of negotiations with the producers. It got very complicated. But Stephen Green, as you know, I'm practically Amish, and so I've never seen Empire.
Me either.
Our old coal-fired hand-cranked television set doesn't get that channel. And, we did a show about this, man, and we came down pretty hard on this guy, and now the legally constituted authorities have said his record is clean. Stephen Green, perhaps you will begin the round of apologies to Mr. Smollett.
Nope. Not gonna do it. Listen, okay, here's what we know. I mean, this is just another example of how the wealthy are now living under a different set of rules than the rest of us.
Sir.
The police had the check, the $3,500 check that he wrote to the two Nigerian immigrant extras from his show that he hired to pretend to beat him up. They've got him on video, security cameras. It's about as ironclad a case as you can possibly imagine. Judge Napolitano, a reader at the PJM Live blog, was conjecturing that maybe there was something wrong with the evidence. I can only conclude that if the evidence got somehow tainted while in police custody, it got tainted accidentally on purpose, as these things are known to happen in Chicagoland. This two-tier justice thing, it ruins faith in our system. What this is the domestic version of the Trump collusion with Russia story. The idea wasn't to actually prove that Donald Trump colluded with the Russians to win the election. There was never any evidence of that, and Robert Mueller, over 2 years and $25 million, couldn't find any evidence of that. The object of that was to delegitimize the election, and the result of it was essentially the Democrat media complex jumping on this thing and delegitimizing the entire American political system, which plays right into Russia's hands. So if you want Russian collusion, there it is. This example here in Chicago delegitimizes our justice system by saying that if you have the right connections, somebody just put up on Twitter a picture of Jussie Smollett posing very swimmingly with former President, well, at the time, President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama. Clearly, the guy has connections, and clearly, that's what happened. The judge sealed the records. We're never going to know exactly what happened. He expunged Smollett's record as though it never happened, even though we know exactly, or at least more or less exactly, what happened. They kept the bond money, which, if that's not an admission of some kind of guilt, I don't know what it is. But my favorite is the screaming headlines on Dredge right now of Jussie Smollett repeating the same lies that he told to the Chicago police, this time with absolutely no fear of any legal retribution whatsoever, and he can do that courtesy of this corrupt and illegitimate so-called justice system in Chicagoland.
Well, Bill Whittle, I feel almost certain and confident that you're not going to engage in the kind of situational ethics that benefits your partisan, side of things the way Stephen Green just did. Jussie Smollett is saying, I would not be my mother's son if I was capable of doing what I was accused of. And he just wants to get back to work, and he'll continue to fight for justice and equality and betterment of marginalized people everywhere. He's been truthful and consistent, he says, at every single level since day one. And here's what, according to the Cook County State Attorney's Office, this is what they said. After reviewing all the facts and circumstances of the case, including Mr. Smollett's volunteer service in the community and agreement to forfeit his bond to the city of Chicago, we believe this outcome is a just disposition and appropriate resolution to this case. Now, Bill, I've got to say that somebody would hear what Steve just said and say, oh, yeah, well, you guys are all for law and order until the system doesn't work the way you'd like it to, and then you're critical of it and you say that it's fixed. Am I right or am I right, Bill?
Yeah, well, I remember during the backstage show I asked you where this decision took place, and you told me it was in Chicago. I said, well, at least we can be assured there's no political corruption involved.
Yeah.
You never know what kind of deal is going to be brokered in Barack Obama's swimming pool. But I can tell you this. My first question really is, so the investigation is ongoing. Is that what the police department has said?
No, it's over.
It's over.
He's done.
No, but what? No, hold on. What about the two white guys in the MAGA hats?
See, none of the stories that I saw had any mention of that, and that's why my reference at the
this is
beginning
what I
of
find-
OJ
this
is
is what
still
I-
looking for
Yeah,
the real
Chicago
killer.
Chicago police are reportedly fuming over this, from what I saw on Twitter earlier today.
This is what I find a little bit odd. I mean, obviously, if Smollet is innocent, they never said he was innocent. They said that he served community service and paid a $10,000 fine, which is pretty much what you'd expect if he was found guilty. But put that aside for a second. Look, I'll tell you one thing. If it turned out that it was me and they had exonerated me and expunged my record, I'd want my 10 grand back. I know he doesn't miss 10 grand. I'd want my 10 grand back, and I'd want an admission that there was no evidence that I did anything wrong. That's not what they said. This is a Chicago under-the-table deal because it makes Democrats, progressives, and black Americans look stupid. And that cannot be allowed to happen under any circumstances. Can it ever be shown that the racism that the left maintains is constantly in play here is in fact completely fabricated by the left? We remember this going back to the Donald Trump rallies where all these fistfights broke out and the talk about these angry white voters who keep supporting Trump as their power recedes into the past. Well, it turns out that angry white fellow John Podesta sent those people to the rallies on behalf of the Democratic Party to start fights. And it turns out that all of these accusations are not only not true, there's no evidence for them, and so the left manufactures evidence for them. And the final thing I'll say about this is, it is yet another example, as Steve was saying, yet another example of the fundamental pathology in this culture, which is, we know it all is pretty much a one-way street, but when you can get away with murder and not pay any price for it, then there's no reason to stop murdering in the future. Blasey Ford slandered Brett Kavanaugh. 30-40% of the population believes he raped some woman at some point in the past. He should have gone after her. He still should go after her, and win a civil judgment, and take a lot of money from her. And in the same way that O.J. Simpson was found guilty by the civil courts, right? When they returned that ridiculous verdict, the Goldmans sued him and found him guilty of murdering. What's her name? His wife.
Nicole Brown Simpson.
Nicole Brown Simpson, thank you. So I'm not impressed. In fact, I'm not only not impressed, I'm appalled at exactly what Steve said about the second tier of justice that applies to Democrats and progressives. And mostly, I am appalled but not surprised that this guy didn't have the good sense in the exact same fashion as O.J. Simpson didn't have the good sense to count his lucky stars, shut up, and go away. You know, that's what you do when you're handed a get-out-of-jail-free card like this. So, yeah, video evidence, written checks, evidence, actual evidence.
Well, I try
what
in
do
the
we need
course
evidence for?
of these.
And the Nigerian guys confessed.
That's just more evidence that has nothing to do with the case, Steve.
Confess to a crime.
In the course of public debates like this, I'll be very honest. I take very little interest in ongoing court cases and these back and forth kind of things with celebrities. Always because in my mind, I think, well, let the justice system play out. Let it happen,
and
So I try not to leap to conclusions. And frankly, there are times when in the course of justice, the prosecution decides we don't have a case here and we're not going to pursue this any further. And I'm sure in many of those cases, people in this audience would applaud that. In many other cases, people in this audience would say, what are you trying to hide? I find myself ill-equipped to evaluate the facts only because I know I'm only getting them third and fourth hand. And so I try not to sit in judgment on these particular cases. I will say this, though, from a strictly communication standpoint, after the great big stink that was made about this event, at the initial fuss that Jussie himself made about what had happened to him, about all the publicity surrounding it, for the prosecution to basically said, well, everything's okay now. We'll keep the check. Thank you very much. And good night. And, that to me, I think the public is owed something more than that. Especially after how this case was intentionally used to gin up a feeling against a certain group of people and an emotional empathizing with another group of people. So I don't know that we have to go to trial with this thing, but I do think more explanation for why the case was dropped is owed to the public. Now, the best explanation I can possibly offer that the prosecution decided to drop this case is because the crime in question is one in which the accused was accused of staging his own beating. And perhaps releasing such a man back into the general population and hoping he's more successful next time is the best thing that could happen to everyone. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.